Sidgwick tries to aim at good generally. Like I said earlier, there's nothing really logically that you can argue in favor of, your good being more important than others' good. Sidgwick is like, good is indefinable and it's universal. And there's no reason, why my good is like better than your good, Keaton.
Right.
There's more recent arguments that I think also work in Sidgwick's favor here. And that's namely that evolution has led us to care about ourselves a lot. But, this is going to be a bit difficult to explain. Basically, evolution has led us to care about ourselves naturally, because if you don't care about yourself, you'll starve to death and you won't reproduce. That's one thing. The other thing is we have these really big moral principles. The argument that modern philosophers that like Sidgwick tend to present is basically saying that evolution leads us to be selfish. So it's not logic that leads us to be selfish. It's just evolution. Because of the fact that it seems to be mostly just evolution that leads us to be selfish and to not fully think about other people and to think about our survival more, then it's actually the logic that wins out more, and it's only biology that's causing this rational egoism to even be a thing. And this is something that I personally think is really, really important, is, if you truly accept that good as a property is equal between persons, between beings, then you kind of lose that sense of self morally, and it becomes almost kind of easier to help other people and to self-sacrifice. I'm not saying, like some utilitarians, we'll get into that later, like some people tend to say that, you need to sacrifice everything for other people. And some people do end up sacrificing everything for other people. Obviously, that's not what Sidgwick wanted, but it's also probably would be better than what we have in society right now, because what we have on average is people being overwhelmingly selfish and overwhelmingly inconsiderate and not taking into account, what moral philosophers have developed over the last 200 years. And I don't blame them, because, evolution and biology wires us a certain way, and it wires us to be selfish, to seek out food, etc. But I think if we really start to internalize these principles of Sidgwick's, that we can start moving beyond that. But first, we have to really care about morality, and that's why I'm even though I'm not in moral philosophy, I'm in economics. I believe, and I'm really passionate in moral philosophy, because I believe that just the passion alone will make me better.
Right. I don't disagree with you at all, honestly. You're talking about the principle of self-preservation. I think that is very, very important. Obviously, every single human being has an internal voice in their head that says, hey, you need to go eat dinner or you're going to wither away, etc. But I also think it's interesting, and I'm not sure if there's a correlation or a causation here, but we are also conscious social animals, and I think that comes from our heightened mind state over a majority of the animal kingdom. So it's very interesting and very important, I would argue, that we need to have conversations about this dynamic of being biologically selfish, but being social animals who need each other to get through situations. And the point you said there at the end about benevolence and how eventually it just becomes almost easier to self-sacrifice to help everybody else through it, I think that's a realization that everybody needs to come to sooner or later in their own right, because if I'm willing to put my coat down so you can walk over the puddle, and you're willing to do that for the next person you see on the street, that type of snowball, there's people who will scream and argue that it's not going to do anything. But I think we're both pleading the case here that one action at a time, if it's logical, consistent, and albeit benevolent, you've also included a couple more terms, they're going to be good actions, and it's going to help us as a human race, as the human race, get through this existence on this planet that is quite volatile together.
Yeah, absolutely. And with the evolutionary argument, just to fully make sure that everyone understands, obviously evolution has led us to be social, has led us to be altruistic, especially to our families and friends. Like everyone finds it pretty easy to give their friends gifts, but with altruism, evolution kind of goes in favor there. Like you evolve to be altruistic, but also there's the logic case of it. Like you need to be consistent both with yourself and with others. But with the selfishness, the evolution stuff really does go into that, but the logic is comparatively a lot weaker in terms of only helping your rational self-interest and never caring about anyone else.
Right.
So it really becomes like, to be altruistic, both your biology and logic are in favor of that. But if you aren't going to be altruistic at all, you're an egoist, you care about what is rationally in your self-interest to maximize your grades and your pleasure, and you only care about that, then, I feel like you're being inconsistent.
Right.
And the only thing that's really causing you to go that way is really your biology. I don't want to necessarily invalidate all egoists, but it's the biology that really pushes us in that direction more so than I think we ought to be. And it's really the logic of a lot of moral philosophers that pushes us in the other direction, to do good more and to do good better. And the cutting edge of moral philosophy especially is to do more good better, but it's not even that. That you may have heard of this guy, Jesus Christ, also said the same thing, that you have to give and give and give.
Yeah.
If you're rich, you have to give, right? And if you see someone without a coat, you have to give them their coat. Sorry, I can't quote the gospel very well, but definitely Jesus was the same way, in that you have to do good more. And I think, there's this general drive towards being more consistent and doing more good. And I feel like more people need to internalize this, and that's, what I'm coming in with today.
Honestly, I think it's very enlightening to have somebody be able to walk you through all of the steps. And when I say all of the steps, it's clearly not all of the steps, but
No, for sure.
where your logical process has gone, obviously, because it was steered through the textbook that we read. I should have led off with this. A majority of the information, all the sources are going to be where they normally are, but a majority of the information that I've garnered and some of the information that you have garnered has come from the Gensler textbook. So our framework for this was shaped by the book we were reading, sure, but it's really nice to see that I could come to these logical conclusions as myself, and I may not necessarily circumscribe to the exact same philosophies as you do. You came to these conclusions, and moral philosophers have been coming to these conclusions for
Right.
years. So I think if we can find a way to present that to people in a compelling way, and one that's actually understandable like we have today, I think it's going to make it a lot easier, because the moral of the story is help as much as you can. And I think we haven't got there yet, but don't help to the point where you fall apart. And that might not even be today's discussion. That might even be next time's discussion. So I'll allow you to continue.
Absolutely. Yeah. Episode isn't over yet, but next episode we'll definitely be talking more about actually doing good and what is good. Right now we're just trying to get there, trying to see whether morality exists or not. I've presented this intuitionism as something that's really good and something that I really like a lot, and there are a lot of people in philosophy are intuitionists, but there's this agreement between intuitionists, and I'm sure you can imagine other problems with what Sidgwick proposes, such as, for example, saying, well, you have to be universal and you have to be benevolent. It doesn't actually lead to some really clear logical leaps for where you get good, and what you should actually do. Like if you say, Keaton, you have to be universal and you have to be benevolent and you have to be prudent. That doesn't really help you a lot with with what you're actually going to be doing in your life.
Right.
And in the Normative Ethics episode, we'll be discussing that more in depth. But basically, the problem with Intuitionism is that the basic moral principles aren't always going to help you. And secondly, that, like I said earlier, intuitionists disagree, and they disagree a lot.
Right.
They generally agree on stuff like knowledge, truth, justice, consistency, pleasure are good things, and pain, ignorance, inconsistency are generally bad things. But there's a wide array of disagreement. Sidgwick believes that what is right, he doesn't use good, he uses right. But Sidgwick believes that what is right is pleasure, and feelings that are associated with pleasure, like success, happiness, contentment, satisfaction. While other philosophers, like let's say More, believe it's not just pleasure. It's gonna be other things. It's gonna be stuff like telling the truth, not killing. And for philosophers like that, other intuitionists that aren't utilitarian like Sidgwick, they say, well, my intuitions, my basic moral principles are don't kill, don't steal, or something along the lines of that. This is called a pluralistic approach. And I'm not going to go into the details of what that means, but the point is intuitionists disagree a lot. And, if you're an engineer and you're trying to say something is true, generally, it's probably going to be true that, gravity is 9.82 seconds per meter squared. I study econ, I wouldn't know. But anyway, with that, you can figure it out with your own logic, but also every other engineer agrees on what gravity is on Earth. But with intuitionism, there's nothing like that. So it really seems like with intuitionism that you're not really getting to truth the same way that you are in mathematics or the same way that you are in the sciences. So people have tried to get around the problem of truth, and one idea to do this without like removing ethics altogether and saying morality is completely subjective, you can do whatever you want, is prescriptivists. And they say when you say X is good, you're not saying a truth claim, which is you're not saying something objective about the universe, something mystical that's out there. You're just saying that I prescribe X and that X is universalizable. So prescriptivists take the logic of consistency and universalizability that I talked about, that when you say X is good, you want everyone else to do X, even to yourself. Prescriptivists take that, but they eschew the part that is morally objective. They say, well, when I say X is good, it's just a phrase. It's not describing anything about the world because morality isn't real, but I can still reason about it and I can still be morally rational. And I think for you listeners that are probably unwilling to accept that morality is objective fact and that there's a moral world associated with logic and with mathematics, which is really understandable, I think that prescriptivism will appeal to you. Basically, when we say that X is good or you ought to do X, it's imperatives. That the grammatical structure is imperatives. Basically, you're telling others what they should be doing, what they ought to do. That's how our moral language kind of works. Prescriptivists say, that's good, that's how it should be. When you say something is good, you're saying that everyone, including yourself, ought to aim at that. Which means that if you say beating up people with short hair is good, and you have short hair and you're a prescriptivist, you're not objectively wrong or objectively right under the prescriptivist view, but you are still irrational. And prescriptivism is really, really good because it allows you to think rationally and say that moral statements are rational or irrational, but without going into the whole kind of mystical almost association of moral absolutism and moral objectivity.
Right.
The issue with prescriptivism is that to some people it might not be satisfying, the same way that moral objectivity isn't satisfying to other people. The Nazis were bad, right? And under a prescriptivist view, they were inconsistent because no Nazi, if they were in a hypothetical world, if a Nazi was a Jew, they wouldn't say that, the Jews need to be killed. They wouldn't say something like that, because obviously they wouldn't themselves want to be killed. And it would be an obvious inconsistency. You could yell at the Nazi, you could say they're inconsistent, but technically under the morally subjective prescriptivist view, you can't say that they're objectively wrong. And some people find that ultimately unsatisfying. I don't think this should necessarily guide you entirely. Just because you find something satisfying or not shouldn't be the be all end all. I think you should think more deeply about it, but it's definitely a strong argument against prescriptivism for some people. Additionally, the way we talk about moral language, the way we use moral language, is we use words like truth, we use you ought to do this, which is a prescription, but we also say stuff like X is good and X is evil. And that's not a prescription. That's just a statement of fact.
Right.
And prescriptivists kind of gloss over this use of moral language. They say that, people are wrong about, or they're just using a heuristic. And when they say X is good, they really mean that you ought to do X. But I think, again, a lot of people will be unsatisfied with this answer. And I personally definitely am. As a moral objectivist, I think that there needs to be some way to say that, the Nazis were objectively evil, and so on and so forth. So let me know if you agree here, what you think about prescriptivism.
I think in the natural order of things, this is the most logical of them in my eyes. So
right.
Supernaturalism and cultural relativism, in my mind, shift moral judgment to somebody else, to society or to God, an ideal observer, etc. So I think in the terms of a moral and an ethical philosophy, for it to be right, you need to have freedom within it, right? So I think Intuitionism obviously does that, but you're also only relying either on your intuitions or the intuitions of somebody who is in a higher authority than you. With prescriptivism, it feels as though you are putting yourself on the line as well, because it's like, if I believe that people should open doors for other people, then I'm going to open doors for everybody, because I believe that I should do this in the same face of the situation as everybody else. So when it comes to my moral judgments, it's like, I'm not going to steal from this store because I believe that nobody should steal from this store. It allows you logic, it allows you freedom, and it seems to be one of the most rational ways to look at a moral truth. But I also do understand your objections to it, because it's very hard for people to, because I know it was difficult for me, see this as a prescription. You ought to do this, meaning I think everybody needs to do this, but also if I was in that same situation, I have to do this. Because it's very simple for just the general human being to give advice, but not to live advice. You know what I'm saying?
Right. And I think that there's ways that people live their own lives that could be better. So if you let's say you have someone making this, prescriptivist statement, you ought to do X, based off their own life, even if they're being fully honest, they might not be fully informed about what could be best for their own life, and their universalizable statement, right? Their imperative is rational because it's based off their own life, and it is at least somewhat informed, but it isn't the best it could be. It doesn't feel like it is the best it could be, right? Let's say you have someone that types on a keyboard with only one hand. They don't know about the other hand.
Exactly.
Right? And they say, you ought to type on the keyboard with one hand. There's some piece of logic in our brains that's saying this is wrong. Obviously it's not morally wrong, but there's a wrong way that this person is living their life. So even you might prescribe something universally, you still have other things to keep in mind other than that consistency universality point. You have to have something, something objective there. And I think with Intuitionism, since you can kind of insert that objective good into there, you can definitely work a lot better with the logic of, someone who fully believes that typing with one hand on their keyboard, and it would be willing to universalize it for everyone, including themselves, is probably wrong, because
it's just
less efficient.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. It's an efficiency thing.
Yes. So it's not necessarily that efficiency matters,
right?
But it's just, since from Sidgwick's point of view, you're trying to go from the point of view of the universe, people generally care about efficiency. So the person that's typing with one hand is wrong because people generally care about efficiency. And therefore, if they typed with one hand, they'd be less efficient and they would be less happy. They would suffer more when they're writing their essay. And you would have an overall worse off world.
Right.
That's why I like Intuitionism over Prescriptivism, is that even if you have someone that's super informed or whatever, you can always go back into it and say, this is how it actually probably should have been. Prescriptivism, however, is still pretty satisfying, like you said, and it has this core element in common that I've been trying to talk about the whole episode, which is consistency. And that's where I think I'm going to conclude, is on the topic of consistency. So, interrupt me if you have any questions, but I'll just get right into it.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what we saw is cultural relativism is self-defeating. Supernaturalism kind of has a paradox in Euthyphro's dilemma that Socrates came up with 3,000 years ago. Egoism, rational egoism, is kind of debunked by evolution, because again, evolution is encouraging you to be egoistic, but logic really isn't. And there's also the probably self-evident notion that your good isn't better than anyone else's good, as long as good remains indefinable. So it's probably bad to be egoistic, which leaves really the last two, which is the philosophically sound approaches, Intuitionism and Prescriptivism. And these, I think, doesn't matter which one you choose, these I think are going to be the most sound for you. I think that morality, like if you get into the bedrock, the core of it, it's about consistency. It's about taking what you want for yourself, let's say good grades, and being consistent with it and giving it to other people. Imagining yourself in their shoes. Imagining yourself as if, you were everyone else. So if you're a student and you want good grades, it's a perfectly good goal for yourself. But if you have a really good opportunity to help your friend maybe get good grades, so you have the free time for it, then I believe it would probably be pretty wrong for you to not help another person that has the same goal as you.
Exactly.
Because even though they're a different person, and even though you don't feel what they feel, the fundamental property that we're looking at here, which is goodness, is still the same, and it's still equally valuable. Inconsistency is logical failure, really. Like, if you're an engineer, you're inconsistent, you fail. If you're a scientist or a mathematician or a logician and you're inconsistent, you fail. And there's really not much of a reason why morality shouldn't be the same way, why consistency can't be the bedrock principle that Sidgwick says it is. And it doesn't matter whether, you believe in moral truths and that morality is objective or not, or whether you believe that, morality is something important that can be reasoned and can be analyzed, but probably isn't like true the same way mathematics is. It doesn't really matter. As long as you accept this core value of consistency, I believe that we can all be on the same page. And what consistency is probably going to demand of you, it's probably going to demand of you to do more, because if you're that student studying, you probably want your friend to come help, and it'll be inconsistent for you to not help in that situation if you're the other student. Sorry that got a little bit roundabout.
No,
but
it's okay.
What consistency is going to mean is it's probably going to demand more of you morally. And this is in line with what Jesus taught, and it's in line also with, the cutting edge of moral philosophy today. But in order to be consistent, well, you need to be informed, right? You need to know all the facts of the situation, that student that you're helping actually wants to study and actually cares about their grades. You need to imagine yourself in the other shoes. Imagination is another form of knowledge, but for morality, it's crucial. People operate and they act based on emotion, right? And if you don't feel any emotion about helping someone else, you won't help them, right? So you definitely need to imagine what it's like to be in their shoes always and constantly. And you need to be able to train that muscle in order to be more and more consistent. You must also imagine in a way that's rational. For example, the feelings and imaginations of a dog. The feelings of a dog aren't going to be the same as the feelings of a human. You have to imagine being a dog as something kind of different, right? Otherwise, you're being illogical. And of course, once you imagine and once you're informed, the last piece of the puzzle, of course, is being consistent. And as long as I think that principle is accepted, it becomes part of your life, it doesn't really matter whether you're a utilitarian or you're a natural law theorist or you believe in supernaturalism or this or this or this. You're still well on your way to actually like meaningfully having a better life and helping other people more. And we don't have to say Gensler's right, Sidgwick's right, utilitarianism is right. We don't have to yell at each other about that.
Yeah.
I think the most important thing is actually helping other people.
I agree.
That is my conclusion. Let me know what you think.
Okay, so I'm going to write a couple of things down. So give me like 30 seconds, and then I'm going to go over them. You tell me if you can agree that these are the lessons that we've gone through the episode, because I want to make sure I'm on the right track. Okay?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
2 very boring minutes later.
Okay. So I've only written down 3 to basically cover everything. What you said right there at the end, regardless of the philosophical framework that you choose, if you're acting consistently, then morality can be the same to everybody regardless. 2, consistency, benevolence, universalizability, and I couldn't remember the third one of Sedgwick's pillars.
Prudence, temporal equality or whatever.
Okay, exactly. So
Yeah.
making sure you're doing all of these in every action you take is one of the first steps towards the good, the nature of good, even though good is undefinable.
Yeah, at least according to Sidgwick, yeah.
Yeah. And then number 3, do more, then do a little more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
All right, so to sum up these points, and really what we're getting at here is, metaethics it gets really, really complicated, and there's a lot of different ways to get to good. Some ways are not accepted by anyone, like cultural relativism, and some ways are accepted by a lot of philosophers, like Intuitionism, philosophers disagree on Intuitionism, but
Yes.
let's just keep it simple. Philosophers generally agree more on Intuitionism. Now, with that in mind, metaethics then becomes really complicated and becomes really opaque, and it's really a question of why you should care. And I could talk more about getting to good, about what is actually valuable, and about the good and bad ways of thinking morally. Right. But really, what we're gonna get into next episode, and what I'm trying to get at now is, you don't have to be perfect in terms of how you think about morality. You just have to be actually willing to act, and to live a virtuous life. Right. However you want to state that. Sidgwick's principles, I think, are a really good way that most people will agree on, to getting there. That your actions have to be universalizable, that they have to be equal across time, they have to be equal across space and among persons, and that they have to actually help others. I think a lot of people will agree on those, and they can be a good stepping stone. But of course, you also need to think farther, and that's where normative ethics is going to come into the next episode.
Well, I don't know. I don't really have much more to say. I think our first episode on metaethics has been wrapped. I think the second episode on normative ethics is going to give you more of a platform to help people now get to the good, or
Yeah. We'll figure out.
Go ahead.
We've gotten to the good, or we've been trying to get to the good, but in normative ethics, we're gonna say, what is good and how we can propagate that good.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest thing is, once we've learned the lesson as individuals, how do we share it to everybody else in a way that they can understand?
Absolutely.
And obviously, I want to preface this. Daniel and I aren't saying that this is the only way to think. You are allowed to believe whatever you want to believe, and if you can disagree with us as individuals, or just an explanation today, and it's rational, and you still feel as though you're living a virtuous lifestyle, we're not here to tell you how to change your life, how to live your life. We're just here exploring the stuff that's hopefully trying to help us become better people. So I appreciate you for taking the time today, Daniel, and I'm very much looking forward to the next episode.
Yeah, definitely. For the listeners, make sure, that's my advice, make sure you think about, how you're getting to the good in your life. If you care about your grades, for example, what are the higher reasons about that? Is it the pleasure that it gives you? If you care about helping others, what is the higher purpose behind that? Because I think that, if you get to these core bedrock reasons, kind of like in the intuitionist methodology, you really start to develop more and more of a passion for it. And before our normative ethics episode, where we actually talk about, what we're going to do, and what's good and what we want to be doing, I think it's really good to develop that passion. So that's my exercise or homework that I'll kind of leave you with, if that's okay.
No,
is definitely
of course.
Think about, what is the good in your life fundamentally. Yeah. Thank you, Keaton, for having me, and thank you to everyone who has listened to this point. I'm definitely very happy and very glad to be here, and I can't wait to see you all in the next episode with myself on normative ethics.
Awesome. And I'm not even going to say anything else. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you guys later. Thank you.